Hi, I'm Azad Ali, and today I have here with me Dr. Efstatios Polizos, Associate Professor of Finance and Associate Dean at the College of Interdisciplinary Studies, Zayed University. Dr. Polizos, good to have you back on our third installment here. Today, we are going to talk about the rapid adoption of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies by institutions. Allow me to start. For years, many institutions hesitated to get involved. What key events or changes in the financial landscape ultimately drove them to action?
Thank you for the question. I mean, that hesitation was understandable in the early days of the crypto market. For a long time, Bitcoin and all the other cryptos were associated with speculation, with limited use cases, and maybe even only anonymous transactions. And I myself was very hesitant of Bitcoin in its infancy. I thought it was more closer to a scam rather than something that would survive from almost 15 years now. And there was also a regulatory ambiguity. I mean, if you bought cryptos, how would they appear in the balance sheet of an institution? But we've seen a big shift in the last 5 years. And I think there were two major turning points. One has been the infrastructure around crypto, and it changed and it became more suited to institutional needs, to what exactly an institution might need. So we have new platforms that offer dedicated services for institutions, large-scale regulated investment instruments with scalable, auditable, and secure systems. These new platforms can handle custody, reporting, and compliance at the level that these big institutions require. So this addressed one of the biggest barriers to entry, which is institutional compliance. I mean, how to hold and move these assets safely within the guardrails of compliance and institutional governance. So that was the first part. The second has been the change in macroeconomic conditions. So particularly after COVID, all central banks pursued the quantitative easing plan aggressively, and this expanded balance sheets, reducing the yields for fixed income products, for standard financial products. So this meant that digital assets like Bitcoin now resonated far more with these institutional investors. So they had the opportunity for higher yields. So I think those two factors contributed significantly to that change. But there were also signals from regulation. We had the approval of ETFs, Bitcoin ETFs by the SEC. We've had spot ETFs in Canada and the US. And actually, my team's research showed that one of the first adopters of the Bitcoin futures ETF was institutional investors, exactly because of this. And this kind of regulatory validation acted as a green light, as a green flag for institutional investors. And we've had also some corporate signals. We've had MicroStrategy moving its treasury to Bitcoin, Tesla buying Bitcoin, and also once BlackRock entered the market, that was the ultimate green flag that cryptos are no longer a niche bet, no longer a niche investment instrument. And because institutions move in herd, once some leaders legitimize the cryptocurrency assets, the others followed directly so that they didn't want to avoid a strategic disadvantage. And I think we use this transformation in our MS Field program as a case study of how innovation diffuses across market participants, not only as a market effect, but what are the behavioral and strategic factors that shape institutional adoption.
It's great to know about the shift there. Dr. Polizos, in what ways do institutional strategies regarding Bitcoin differ from retail approaches beyond just the size of their portfolio?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the size difference is obvious, but that doesn't explain alone the different mindsets that institutional investors have from retail investors. We have differences that go much deeper, and the key difference is fiduciary responsibility. So institutions have the obligation to justify every investment with risk-adjusted performance measures, mandates, compliance protocols. It is a different type of approach. A retail investor can just act, on sentiment, on narratives, even through social media momentum. And this difference accounts for a systematic, data-driven approach that institutions take to crypto exposure. And of course, it affects the choice of instruments. Like we said, institutions like these regulated products, they like ETFs, they like futures. But retail investors, they can go directly, they can interact with platforms directly, and even with DeFi platforms, and buy crypto directly, buy products in the spot market. And this is not only a risk perspective, but it is a behavioral one. An institution would like transparency, liquidity, reporting tools. It is a different type of approach to investment overall. And another important difference is the integration of these assets into the investor portfolio. So a retail investor might, go all in, buy a single coin or chase momentum. They don't consider a portfolio integration. But institutions, they use these digital assets as part of a broader multi-asset framework. So they would allocate funds to crypto, but they would also allocate to equity, bonds, commodities. And I have supervised research project in this very topic, and we actively explore that in our curriculum. We show students how they can construct portfolios, robust portfolios that incorporate these high volatility assets in a risk control way. Also, one difference is the time horizon. So institutional investors want long-term, they will take a strategic position because they want long-term exposure, maybe as a hedge against inflation, maybe a bet on technological disruptions. But the retail investors are opportunistic. They move, they react to price movements, they react to news cycles. So there is a big difference. And when we talk about institutions entering the space, it's not about a bigger buy. It's not only about a bigger wallet. It's a fundamental difference, and one that I believe we prepare our students for, because they understand how institutional thinking operates. It's slower, more deliberate, and more data-driven. And I think that's the biggest difference.
That's great. We've seen companies like MicroStrategy fully commit to cryptocurrencies, while others take a more cautious approach to ETFs. What does this contrast reveal about the internal decision-making processes within large organizations?
This is a great question, because the contrast is striking, and it reveals differences about risk tolerance and strategic financial vision across firms, even if they're in the same industry. And you mentioned MicroStrategy. That is a great case. It's a unique case. It is a founder-led agile company. It's positioned more like a tech company rather than a financial institution, at least a traditional financial institution. And when they moved their treasury reserves into Bitcoin, that was a very bold move by their CEO, Michael Saylor. And there was no internal deliberation, no bureaucracy, just a strong conviction that we need to hedge against inflation, we need to hedge against technological asymmetries. So the decision was very easy to implement. Now, if we compare that to a large bank, a traditional bank, that would be a committee-driven corporation with layers of risk management, compliance, shareholder oversight, reputational concerns. So the difference is huge. This results in a measured incremental strategy. I mean, a bank would start with the indirect exposure through ETFs before moving into products with direct exposure. So a bank would not go and buy Bitcoin. They would buy a Bitcoin future and see how it goes, make a case for it, and then go into direct exposure. And this demonstrates your point. The behavior among institutions is not homogeneous. It's not the same. It depends on internal alignment between the vision and how that vision is operationalized. Some firms can take quick decisions, even hasty, some might say hasty decisions, but others need a provable business case, an internal buy-in, and a defined regulatory perimeter. So they need to know where they're operating. And this is I think we use this case in our MS Film program, particularly when discussing strategic decision-making, financial decision-making. The students will analyze both ends of the spectrum. What did MicroStrategy, what made them take such a concentrated bet? And what would a company like BlackRock need to justify that similar move internally? So we explain both sides of the argument because this ties into their career paths. They need to learn to operate in both environments. They need to learn in an agile, high-risk setting where financial tools would be deployed rapidly. Think of a fintech startup, for example. That would be a similar case. But they also need to understand the slow-moving legacy setting where innovation has to be justified rigorously. And that contrast is a reality in the financial world today, and we prepare our students for that.
Very insightful. Dr. Polizos, is the adoption of cryptocurrencies by institutions reinforcing the narrative of Bitcoin as digital gold, or is it transforming it into something more utility focused?
I think you are right. It has reinforced the digital gold narrative. I mean, when they entered the space, they were looking for a store of value asset. Like we said, like after COVID, they needed something to hedge against inflation. They had these external factors. So Bitcoin fit that narrative, right? It was big enough that it is relatively trustworthy, but it's still scarce, decentralized, and outside sovereign control. So it looks like gold, but it was programmable. I'm not sure though about framing Bitcoin specifically as a utility-driven asset, especially if we consider it a substitute for cash in everyday transactions or institutional transactions. The issue here is volatility. Cash is stable, right? It's impacted only by inflation, but Bitcoin can swing by several points, several percentage points on each single day, and that volatility makes it, in my opinion at least, unsuitable for operational finance needs. Maybe in corporate treasuries, retail payment systems. I don't think that at the moment it can work as a utility-focused asset. But I think the institutional interest has reinforced that Bitcoin is a speculative store of value. It's a monetary insurance policy, an insurance policy against monetary conditions. It will be on the balance sheet of companies like BlackRock, like MicroStrategy or Tesla even, but not to make payments, but to hedge against inflation, against geopolitical risk or systemic fragility. So in that sense, it has a symbolic and strategic role. But the landscape itself, it's introducing tools that Bitcoin in itself cannot deliver. We have new programmable financial instruments, smart contracts, tokenized real-world assets. Those are expanding what digital assets can do. So these use cases are built not on Bitcoin itself, but on blockchain, on other blockchain platforms. So I think that we have the digital gold narrative stronger. I'm not sure that it will evolve in a utility-driven asset, not at the moment, but it is a hedge. In the next probably 5 years, I think there will be a convergence of narratives. We will use, I can see Bitcoin being a macro asset, a monetary insurance policy, like we said before, and we will have systems, Ethereum-like systems, that will act as programmable platforms for payment systems and for these utility transactional tools. And I think our job as educators is to prepare the next generation of finance professionals to understand both tools.
That's great to know how you're preparing for the future. How are compliance teams in traditional financial institutions managing the legal risks associated with cryptocurrency exposure?
I think that's a great question, particularly because it is also an example of a great big change. Because managing risk and regulatory risk and legal risk in the cryptocurrency space, it's a nightmare. I think it's a very challenging task for compliance teams, particularly those in traditional institutions. They are used to operating under a well-defined framework, long-established protocols, and unlike traditional finance, crypto remains gray in a fragmented area, particularly at the global level. So we don't have global regulation at the moment. We have fragmented in different jurisdictions. And I think what I have observed, and I've seen that from collaborations with industry and through research projects on digital finance, institutions have taken this heavily risk managed tiered approach. So we discussed, they will take an indirect exposure through a regulated instruments, and they will and then they might consider moving. But these regulated ETFs or future instruments, they can provide exposure to these crypto assets, but there is no need for the institutions to hold assets themselves directly. And this is a compliance win because it allows the institution to have existing compliance framework and to use the existing compliance framework to be exposed in the crypto assets without any change in the infrastructure. So I think that is a win. But compliance risk has now moved from reactive to proactive. So many teams are employing on-chain analytics, machine learning into the monitoring systems. And there are new blockchain forensics tools that are almost real time, and they are being integrated into the internal compliance systems because these allow institutions to monitor wallet addresses, trace fund origins, and they can assess exposure to high-risk geographies or high-risk individuals. This was a challenge that the crypto space posed for traditional institutions that want to comply with FATF regulation, for example. And another development, of course, that is very important is the regulatory sandboxes. We have one here in ADGM in Abu Dhabi, but there's also one in Singapore, in the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Those frameworks give room to the institutions to experiment with cryptos in a controlled environment. They still follow the principles of accountability and transparency, but they can, let's say, play around with crypto safely. And from my interaction with stakeholders, these sandboxes are reshaping not just policy, but also internal risk perceptions, and they foster innovation, they enhance innovation. But this requires the training. People who knew about Basel III or MiFID or all these protocols, they need to get familiar with new terms. And that's not a small shift because it requires institutional support and an adaptive mindset. And I think we prepare our students, we make them ready for both ecosystems. They have a strong foundation in traditional finance, but a knowledge and an exposure to the crypto space as well.
Fantastic. Dr. Polisos, what blind spots do you think institutions still have regarding the long-term implications of blockchain-based developments?
Right. I think that's a very important question. And I think one of the main blind spots is that they see blockchain as a mean of creating speculative assets and price volatility. They don't necessarily recognize that blockchain is a general purpose technology, something that will be disruptive, something like the internet perhaps in the future for financial institutions. So they focus on the surface layer, Bitcoin, Ether, ETF approvals, token prices. Okay, they have risk mandates and they have the fiduciary responsibility that we said before, so that's understandable. But the innovations that come with blockchain, the distributed consensus, the immutable ledger, the distributed ledger, and the programmable transactions, they have the potential to alter how the foundations of how value is recorded, verified, and exchanged. So this is an infrastructural change that is coming. It's not only a financial change. For example, if we might have in the future, we might see a blockchain-based settlement system that it could reduce the risk in traditional finance, and many institutions don't know what this means in terms of internal operations or technological dependency. They don't think that they will need to adopt it. It can change the settlement process that has been around for many years. We could have custody functions becoming obsolete or automated. Even we could have almost real-time financial reporting. So the audit and compliance cycles, we need to rethink them. There is going to be a big difference coming. And the biggest blind spot, I think, is the assumption that regulatory convergence will catch up to innovation. Always regulation is a few steps behind, and crypto and the DeFi space, they move faster than the legal frameworks can accommodate. Some countries, the UAE, Singapore, are taking a proactive stance, but many institutional actors are almost paralyzed by uncertainty. So they don't really understand this. They don't really understand what to do, and this leads to inaction. Also, another final blind spot is integration. if institutions do engage with blockchain strategies, they do that as an experiment, even perhaps by a small team or by an individual within a department, and they don't understand that this needs to be embedded across all departments. So blockchain should not be, or it might not be in the future, but it definitely should not be a separate division. It needs to be a layer within everything from payments, KYC, lending, insurance. It needs to be ubiquitous. So if institutions don't start preparing for it now, strategically, not only technologically, they risk being displaced by crypto startups, but also by this new financial infrastructure that will no longer fit the traditional existing models of financial institutions. So they need to be prepared now.
Great to know how Zayed University is preparing everyone, especially the market in the UAE. Now, coming to that aspect, from the perspective of the UAE, how are local regulations and sovereignty strategies shaping institutional interest in digital assets?
I think the UAE is a fascinating case study in forward-looking regulatory framework and how this shapes institutional behavior. We discussed in our previous podcast about how regulation has fostered innovation into the crypto market in the UAE. But what stands out is it's not that that crypto is being allowed in the UAE. It is being actively invited, framed, and integrated into a national development plan. So some countries are reactive to crypto, but the UAE is proactively building a financial future that includes digital assets not as a auxiliary tool, but as a structural component of the economy. One very important initiative that comes to mind is, of course, the central bank digital currency, the e-dirham initiative. This is not a speculative venture. It is a carefully orchestrated effort to modernize cross-border payments, to enhance monetary efficiency, and retain sovereign control in this financial rapidly digitized financial landscape. But this type of initiative gives institutions the confidence that crypto-related innovation it's in alignment with state goals, and this provides the necessary long-term horizon for institutional investors. ADGM's regulatory framework, the VARA regulatory framework in Dubai, they're not just about creating a licensing pathway. It's about integrating crypto into the broader economic and innovation strategy of the country. And this is the importance of the sandbox, for example. This is where institutions find value, long-term value, in a framework, in an ecosystem that's progressive and credible. And our alignment with that at Zayed University is very clear. The program, the MSFIN program, is built with an understanding that regulation, innovation, and education must converge. And our research on digital assets modeling, blockchain fundamentals, fintech, it supports not just our students, but the larger UAE mandate to cultivate a research-driven, innovation-ready talent base. And we're not watching from the sidelines. We're part of this national effort to build capacity in the crypto landscape. So institutional interest in the UAE is not about favorable regulation. It's a coordinated national strategy that looks at digital assets as a pillar of sovereign financial strength and of economic diversification, financial modernization and economic diversification. Institutions enter this space not to invest in crypto, but they invest in a system that's designed to last. This gives them the long-term value that they're looking for.
Yes, indeed. Like you said, innovation and education. And that brings us to the last question for today. Looking forward, which do you believe will have a more significant long-term impact? The influx of institutional capital into cryptocurrencies, or the influence of crypto native protocols on traditional institutional frameworks?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure I have a definitive answer on that. Timing matters for sure. Over the long term, it is very tempting to say that crypto native protocols will transform institutional finance. And they might. It's been an industry that's been roughly the same for maybe 200, 300 years. There might be a big change, but the pace of change in these large organizations, we see that institutional resistance, it's a real factor. I would call it institutional inertia. They don't want to move. Like we said, big banks are regulated, risk-averse entities, and they have a culture that's very resistant to change. They don't want to do things differently. So adapting a decentralized model across the board, I don't think it will happen quickly. If it happens at all, it will definitely not happen quickly. But there is the influx of institutional capital, and that's producing clear effects, measurable effects. It's brought stability to pricing, enhanced credibility, and the Bitcoin ETFs, for example, they did more than open up a new asset class. They signal to markets that crypto is no longer a fringe activity. This validation, it's very important because institutions, they legitimize an asset class just by showing up, just by buying it. If BlackRock buys Bitcoin, we believe that it's no longer a strange asset, something that we don't, an exotic bet. So this paves the way for more conservative investors. So we might see pension funds, we might see insurance companies, even sovereign wealth funds invest heavily, at least in the crypto space, because they will be able to enter the space under these compliant, regulated conditions. It may not transform financial architecture in a huge way, but this institutional capital, the inflow of institutional capital, plays a powerful role in enabling market maturity, having more people enter the market from different backgrounds, with different risk profiles. But crypto native ideas, I think they do exert influence, but probably more slowly. We have, like we said before, tokenization, programmable money. These concepts are being piloted, I think, not adopted wholesale at least, but institutions are trying them out. And some financial institutions are exploring private blockchain applications or some kind of controlled token environment, always within the legal technical boundaries. It's not a revolution, like many people might have guessed, but it is a gradual negotiation with risk, with compliance, with legacy systems, and with a change-resistant culture. So it is a gradual process. And from the research and educational standpoint, I mean, both in my research work and in our MS-Fin program, we encourage the students to assess this dynamic critically. What does it mean to adopt a decentralized protocol in a centralized firm? How do you, if you have a hierarchical governance structure, how do you reconcile that with a distributed consensus mechanism? Those are very difficult questions. These are not just technical puzzles. They are regulatory organizational dilemmas, and our graduates will be called on to make decisions on this in the future. So, I mean, institutional capital flows are an immediate force in the crypto landscape, but over time, I think this creates a space for deeper structural change, but this will happen in layers, not in leaps. Hopefully, institutions will learn from crypto because they will do it in their terms, in their timelines. But if they don't, they risk becoming outdated, like we discussed before.
Thank you, Dr. Polisos, for your time and valuable information.